Hello folks, I hope it's all going groovy for you. Now, on this cold and grey rainy day, I'm in the Cheshire town of Warrington again for this Musical Steps episode. And because I get cold quite easily, I've snuck into this cafe to keep warm whilst I record this narration. As usual, I'm going to sneak in occasional relevant song titles and lyrics during this video. So if you get time, let me know in the comments how many you spot. The last time I created an episode here in Warrington was when I covered the band Viola Beach, where I tried to present a positive approach to their tragic story. For this episode though, I'll be talking about a particular superstar musician's fleeting connection with Warrington. That particular musician played in Warrington 5 years before his song of that name became the opening track on his massively successful album Ziggy Stardust that made him a star. Man. I'm talking of course about David Robert Jones, better known as David Bowie, from his late teenage wildlife years. A pre-fame Bowie was such a huge fan of 60s pop and rock that he initially wrote and recorded songs in that style. Now, despite being regarded as a musical chameleon throughout his career, Bowie's love of that style of music never left him, as I'll illustrate as this episode progresses. Just as he changed his name to Bowie at 19 years of age, the unknown Davy Jones played at a live music venue in Warrington on July the 2nd, 1966 that doesn't exist any longer, though the building does. The Line Hotel on Warrington's Bridge Street was a very popular live music venue throughout the 60s and 70s and part way through the 80s too. In fact, one of the first bands I played in, the Noise Orchestra, we played at the Line a few times in the mid-80s, where we played modern love songs. Since its demise as a live music venue, the Lion inevitably became a 10 pints of lager and a fight please sort of dance club towards the end of the 80s and into the 90s, with nightclub names such as Babylon and Reflex. In fact, despite being long closed down, I think it still bears the name above the door of one of those clubs. Prior to becoming a nightclub, loads of artists and bands played at the Line Hotel through the 60s and 70s as an early stepping stone to later success. For example, not only did David Bowie play at the Line in '66, as the UK was engrossed in the England football team in the midst of their subsequent World Cup triumph, but as Bowie's support act, Eric Clapton too played there with his short-lived band Powerhouse. Bowie and his musicians received 30 quid between them for their gig, though I bet the infamously stingy Bowie didn't share out the 30 quid equally. Parsimony seems to have been a trait Bowie shared with his friend and rival Mark Bolan. For his support slot, Clapton got 25 quid for his band, made up of famous names such as Stevie Winwood and Jack Bruce and Paul Jones. Incidentally, Paul Simon also played at the Line Hotel. He played here a week before the infamous gig he played at a Widnes Folk Club 10 miles to the west of here, where it said he partially wrote Homeward Bound at Widnes train station after the gig and returning to his digs in London. If you want to know more about that Paul Simon gig in Widnes, check out my Musical Steps episode dedicated to Paul Simon and Widnes, as you would expect. Anyway, back to Bowie. He was 19 years old when he played the Line Hotel in Warrington, and it was the first gig he played under his new name of Bowie, after previously using his real surname of Jones for previous gigs with other bands. His previous band names, Davy Jones and the Lower Third, and Davy Jones and the King Bees, had not had any real success, so it seems Bowie decided a more rock star name would help his career progression. The name change was also required for more practical reasons. The extremely popular American band The Monkees, of I'm a Believer and Daydream Believer fame, had a singer called David Jones, so to avoid confusion the new name Bowie was selected. Incidentally, Bowie was booked to play the Line Hotel with one of his previous bands, the Lower Third. However, owing to not achieving any success with his previous bands, Bowie had just put together a new band called The Buzz, and it was with them that he played the Lion. The year before the Lion gig, Bowie had recorded a few singles with the lower third, but none of them had been successful. Despite having a deal with Parlophone Records, the single You've Got a Habit of Leaving, recorded and released on August 20th, 1965, and written by Bowie, featured Bowie's backing band, the lower third. Bowie at the time had convinced his manager to contact American record producer and songwriter Shel Talmy, best known for his work with The Who and the Kinks, to try and get him to listen to Bowie's latest composition, You've Got a Habit of Leaving, and record and produce it. Talmy had a good track record that impressed and attracted Bowie to want to work with him. For example, Talmy arranged and produced hits such as You Really Got Me by the Kinks, that featured Jimmy Page of Led Zeppelin, prior to Led Zeppelin by the way, doing session work on rhythm guitar. Talmy also produced My Generation by The Who and Friday on My Mind by the Easybeats. 8 years later, Bowie would record a covers album that featured that Easybeats song. Talmy was initially impressed with Bowie's song You've Got a Habit of Leaving and agreed to produce the single for Parlophone Records. But not all was cordial in the studio, however. There were many disagreements between Bowie and Talmy during the recording. To Talmy's annoyance, Bowie wanted the backing vocals to sound like monks chanting, but the impossible idea was soon discarded after being likened to walking up a hill backwards. Instead, under Talmy's influences, the single was crafted to sound like Talmy's work with The Who and the Kinks, and as a result, Bowie copied the vocal style of the Who singer, Roger Daltrey. Bowie was a big fan of The Who. Bowie later said, "I had a thing about The Who. We used to support them during their gigs around Bournemouth and across the south coast." That was the first time Bowie met The Who's guitarist and songwriter, Pete Townshend. However, one time during a sound check at the Bournemouth gigs, Pete Townshend emerged from his dressing room to take a listen to Bowie's band sound checking for the night's gig. He wasn't impressed. Townshend snapped at Bowie, "You're trying to write like me." Bowie replied, "Yeah, what do you think?" Unimpressed, Townshend left with the reply, "There's a lot of bands around like you at the moment." Now, maybe as an act of revenge, shortly before the release of You Got a Habit of Leaving in July '65, Bowie attempted to get as much publicity as possible for the song by getting a letter published in the UK music newspaper Melody Maker under the fictitious name of Jennifer Taylor. In that letter, Bowie's female pseudonym said, "The Who are only bordering on this new sound. If people want the real thing, listen to Davy Jones and the lower third from London." Despite the song growing from a 1960s Carnaby Street sound into a raucous guitar-heavy Townshend redolent onslaught with Beatles-style harmonica punctuation, the single failed to chart. Incidentally, Bowie's love of Townshend's songs saw him record a couple for his September '73 released Pin-Ups album that only featured cover songs of Bowie's 60s influences, the sort of songs Bowie would have covered live at the Lion in Warrington in '66. Pin-Ups, if you didn't know, was recorded and released just after Bowie achieved his first real fame, after his breakthrough albums, Ziggy Stardust and Aladdin Sane, when he was utterly burned out with fatigue after playing different characters on stage. Riding the success of the Ziggy Stardust and Aladdin Sane albums, Pin-Ups peaked at #1 despite not being well received by critics. In fact, Pin-Ups sold better than Bowie's previous album, Aladdin Sane, though most fans would argue Aladdin Sane is a much better album. Ostensibly, Pin-Ups was recorded as a covers album to help Bowie recover from fatigue from a few years of relentless touring and recording. However, another reason for its release was Bowie's manager was negotiating for larger royalties from Bowie's music publisher, now that Bowie was making his publishers big money. Bowie's manager suggested to him not to record any further Bowie compositions until the increased royalty negotiations were concluded favourably for Bowie. The Pin-Up sessions were supposed to help Bowie overcome his exhaustion. However, most accounts say the recording sessions were fraught with tension and difficulty. Apparently, the only thing that kept Bowie going was Well, he was able to record his favourite 60s songs. Songs, as said earlier, he would have played during his only performance in Warrington on July the 2nd, 1966 at the Line Hotel. Bowie's sole Warrington gig was one of only a very few that saw him perform in the north of England, at that time halfway through the swinging 60s. Bowie did play one other gig in the northwest of England, a couple of months earlier in Chester on April the 25th, 1966.